title of your next book should be How Not to Retire.
Or it should be probably Retired but Not Tired. Somebody came to us with information and I said, what if we go there and we find nothing? He said, Janab, aap pe goli zarur chalegi.
Have you been shot?
मैंने फौज में अपने पूरे 4 decades में कभी patriotism word नहीं सुना था. When I went to Hawaii for study program, there were 3 Pakistani officers. They would routinely get up and try to talk against India. हमारी फौज में एक सिखलाई है और ये है कि जब बास्केटबॉल खेलो तो ड्रिबलिंग के नंबर नहीं होते. He said, what do you mean? So the only unfinished business is PoK and the end of militancy. There is no other business. What the government has done is reduced the Pakistanis to a point of irrelevance.
Because you mentioned Sam Maneckshaw. So have you ever had the chance to meet the legend?
Absolutely. I've had the great honor of meeting Sam Maneckshaw.
Thank you so much, sir, for being on the show. It's actually our honor. And
Thank you very
it's a personal pleasure to host the Army Personals.
Thank you.
On the iRonik show, we have hosted many defense veterans. This is yet another Army special, this time with Major General Neeraj Bali. In this podcast, we have talked about India, Pakistan and China issues, the PoK issues, Major General Bali's counter-insurgency operations in Kashmir. But as a learning curve, we have talked about how to build a culture within yourself, within the organization and within the country. This is a special podcast with a very senior defense veteran and I'm sure you will love it, giving you Major General Neeraj Bali on the iRonik show. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for being on the show. It's actually our honor and
Thank you
it's
very
a personal
much.
pleasure to host the Army Personals.
Thank you.
How have you been, sir?
Well, everything has been good. Can't complain. I am probably one person who's hit the sweetest spot of retirement anyone can. I retired from the army 8 years ago, but my single goal in life was never to retire, and I've kept that every single day. So to be able to lead a purposeful life, to give meaning to your life, I don't think you can be happier than that. So things are good.
So I think the title of your next book should be How Not to Retire.
Or it should be probably Retired but Not Tired.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. You have been in the army for how long?
So if you include the training part, which started in January 75, I wore uniform for 40 years and 4 months in all and retired in April of 2016.
Wow. So 40 years in army. That's almost the 10 times 400 stories at least.
Well, even if someone stays in the army for a year,
Right.
he will probably have a lot of stories to tell.
Exactly. I mean, the kind of stories that I've heard from the army people and the defense personals overall, I don't think anyone else has those sort of stories, interesting stories, adventurous stories, and even love stories with the nature.
Well, there's a reason for it. There is one great blessing for people who join the army, and that is you're not into a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
Your job is adventurous, different. If there's one thing I have not led, it's a boring life. I have not led a boring life. There's been no boring days. So whether it is at work or at play, the army will create environment where people can actually enjoy both, even though
Absolutely.
some of that life is hard.
So talking about nature, you have had many operations in Kashmir. So was that one of your favorite terrains to where you have been posted, or have been any as such favorite location that you have been posted in?
Right. So I have served on multiple borders and multiple terrains, as everybody does
Right.
who serves that long, nothing special. Out of which 10 years I did in Jammu and Kashmir. And the period I spent as a commanding officer of a Rashtriya Rifles battalion for 3 years in the Kupwara area at the height of militancy was probably the most satisfying one. Obviously, it was dangerous, but in terms of job satisfaction, of being able to do something meaningful, that was the best part.
So this is, just to let you know, so this is my second podcast with someone from the infantry. So earlier I had Major Samartur on the podcast. We hosted him, I think, last year. And he mentioned one beautiful thing, that every war is won by the infantry. So infantry is the queen of, overall services. So do you agree to it?
Look, once you've served long enough and risen to a rank as senior as I have, I wouldn't want to be biased towards anything, not infantry. You see, it's like in every family, everybody plays a role. Right now, we're sitting in the studio, everyone's playing a role. Okay. So you cannot say that infantry or armored corps or the artillery are the ones who win the war. The guys who bring your food on mules are also doing a great job. Right. So I understand the spirit on which Major Samar would have said that. That's a statement full of josh, and I expect nothing less from a officer of his rank. But I wouldn't say that. I think everyone plays a great role, and if once we go forward, I would actually like to tell you a story about the role which not only will tell you that how important everyone's work is, and how we should look at the jobs we get. I'll be happy to tell you the story.
Let's hear it now, sir.
All right. So in 1997 or 98, I was commanding officer of a battalion in Kashmir. A battalion has 1,000 troops and about 10, 15 officers. One of my companies was going up the hills into the jungles to look for militants. They were likely to spend a couple of days there. What the Pakistanis do is, when they send militants, they cross the border and then they hide in the jungles for some time till they see everything is clear. Then they come into the valley. So since the company was going, I decided to go along with the company commander. When we came down, I think after a couple of days, it was late in the evening, around 8 o'clock, and the company commander said, by the time you reach your headquarters, it will be another 2 hours. So why don't you have dinner with us? And I said, sure. There is a tradition in the army that officers try and see that the men start eating first before the officers start dining. Okay. And officers, especially young officers, will routinely go to the langar to check the food. So I told the company commander, I said, let's walk up to the langar and see kya khana bana hai. And when we checked, the food was normal. It was rice and chapati and dal and sabzi and some salad and papad. So I called the langar commander. You see, in the army, everybody is a commander. So there's a sepoy who looks after langar, but he's also called langar commander. So I called him and said, Beta, people have come after such a hard operation where, by the way, we had got no success. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you make something more interesting in the food? So he said, sir, मैं क्या करता? ना तो chicken आया, ना eggs आए आज supply में, कुछ था ही नहीं बनाने के लिए. So I told the company commander, give him some money, give him some 500 or $1,000, give him 4 jawans with AK-47s, let him go to a couple of villages now and buy all the eggs possible. And then eggs will be made, and then the troops will have dinner. Now the soldiers were lining up for food. And so I said, everyone go back to your tent or your room, and everybody gets 2 pegs of rum free of cost from me. So you party, and by the time the food will be ready. Next day I came back to that company to debrief on what had happened in the operation. But I also called this langar commander. And I asked him this question, which each one of your listeners should very carefully hear and probably ask themselves. I said, beta, ye batao, tumhara role kya hai? He said, mera role hai khana banwana. So I said, khana अच्छा बने, गंदा बने, उसमें कुछ गिर जाए या स्वादिष्ट हो, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. So he realized कि इसको सीओ साहब पकड़ने वाले हैं मुझे. So he said, नहीं सर, मेरा रोल है पौष्टिक और स्वादिष्ट खाना बनाना. आई सेड पर तेरी तनख्वाह तो बढ़ने वाली है नहीं, चाहे तू गंदा खाना बना या अच्छा बना, तनख्वाह तो उतनी मिलनी है तेरे को. आर्मी में कोई बोनस तो होता नहीं साल के लास्ट में. So why would you bother about good food? He said, no, sir, when I make good food, when I make tasty food, the morale of these boys goes up. I said, but you're not the Prime Minister of the country. Why are you worried about morale? तेरी तनख्वाह तो वही रहनी, तू तो लंगर कमांडर है. इनके मोराल से तूने क्या करना है? He looked surprised. कहते सर, जब मैं टेस्टी खाना बनाता हूँ ना, स्वादिष्ट, बढ़िया, इनका मोराल ऊंचा होता है तो ये बाहर जाके मिलिटेंट मारते हैं. मैंने कहा, दैट इज योर रोल. यू आर नॉट अ चपाती मेकर. यू आर हेल्पिंग किल टेररिस्ट. दैट इज द क्रक्स ऑफ योर रोल. Your role is how you perceive it. All right? The people who are helping you in podcast or people like you can say, I'm a podcaster. No, that's your job description. Your role is to spread knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? And in some ways, you are helping the youth of this country to get inspired, to become more knowledgeable, to become more thinking. When you look at your role in this grand way, then your role starts giving meaning to what you must do. All right? A teacher who says, my role is सुबह आना, syllabus खत्म करना है मैंने और वापस घर जाना है, will teach in a certain way. And a teacher who says, I'm going to make some great citizens in this country, some students under me will shine, will teach in a different way. Both will get the same pay, both will do the same job, spend same number of hours. So this should tell your listeners, no matter what job you do, is extremely important. मैं तो उस लंगर कमांडर को ये भी बोल सकता था कि बिकॉज यू मेक स्वादिष्ट और पौष्टिक खाना और उससे मिलिटेंट मारे जाते हैं, तो नेशनल इंटरेस्ट पूरा कर रहा है. यू आर हेल्पिंग द कंट्री विन. यू लुक एट इट दैट वे. इट्स नॉट अ स्मॉल रोल. ऑलराइट? बट वी फुलिशली थिंक कि मेरा क्या काम है, मैं तो आई एम अ जूनियर मैनेजर, आई एम, पता नहीं मैं असिस्टेंट मैनेजर भी बनूंगा कि नहीं, आई एम जस्ट एन एग्जीक्यूटिव. नो, you all have a grand role. So similarly, not just infantry, everybody has a great role.
So I was just coming to that. So in our day-to-day lives, we tend to forget what we are meant to do, right? We just look at what we are getting in return. What is my KRA? In corporate terms, we all refer to our KRAs because we are at the end of the financial year or at the end of the quarter, whatever is the appraisal cycle, people are rated how much they have done on their KRA. 90% of the people would focus only on the 6, 7, 8 points that are defined in their, this is your job description. But how many of us really understand our role?
Yeah, so that's the tragedy. And because we don't understand what a grand thing we are doing, and because our leaders don't sometimes tell us what we are really achieving, what we are doing. Let's take the example of a corporate company, since you mentioned one. Sometimes I ask people in the corporate companies, I say, who does your marketing? The answer always is, oh, we have a VP marketing, or we have a GM marketing, we have this. No, everybody in the company is doing marketing. Everybody is doing brand building. How? So if you have a receptionist who's giving awkward answers or who's not picking up the phone,
right?
Or if a client comes and she makes him sit for 1 hour for nothing, doesn't even offer him a cup of tea, she's the one destroying your brand. On the contrary, she can build your brand. Okay, so we all have to understand that we all contribute in a big way towards our families, towards the job we do, and for the country we live in. It's not the government's country, it is everybody's country.
Yeah.
Okay, so and I always say it took our great Prime Minister to tell us how to stay clean with Swachh Bharat. But frankly, it should have been instinctive to all of us. And it should be, even today.
Exactly. Sometimes it feels sad that things such basic as clean, being clean or keeping your city clean or, maintaining the hygiene of a particular city like we do in our homes. Right? If we all contribute, I think we can keep our cities clean, and for that we have to create a separate campaign. The government has to create an entire separate campaign to help us understand that you have to keep your city clean, and still we don't understand that.
I'm glad that campaign happened, and I'm glad that idea was put so firmly in our minds that even people like me who are reasonably disciplined, after that thing started, even if I had a little paper in my hand which I had to throw, sometime I saw that I was holding on to it for 15 minutes because I was looking for some place, proper place to throw. I was in Japan earlier this year, and I started wondering, here is a spotlessly clean country, but I don't see too many waste paper baskets or bins. In our country, of course, there are a lot of bins everywhere now. And I used to wonder, where are the bins? Where are they throwing stuff? And when I traveled in the train from Kyoto to Tokyo and back, they have a high-speed train called Shinkansen. I realized what the secret is. When the Japanese have trash, they roll it, put it in a little plastic bag, put it back in their bags. They throw it at home. They don't litter the country. Okay? It's a cultural thing. I think we all can develop that culture and not just stay clean, but do magnificent things in this world. If we all decide that, okay, I have a role, I have to contribute something.
So we'll come back to the roles and the culture again, right? But let's first understand your army, experience overall. So you have been posted in Kashmir for almost 10 years. And so in your infantry, I think you were also leading the counter-insurgency operations, the terrorist.
Well, as a battalion commander, yes.
Right. So what was going on at that point of time in Kashmir?
Okay. I just want to start from somewhere else and then I'll come back to that. When we were coming here and we were discussing my background and so on, there's something I want to share with everyone. A lot of people admire the army and we are grateful. And a lot of people wonder how the army does so many magnificent things, so many courageous things. Ordinary soldiers make great sacrifices. What everyone looking at this podcast must understand, and I'm sure they understand, that we come from the exact same backgrounds as everybody else. We come from the same small towns, same villages, same education standards, same parental issues and problems and anxieties, same finances, same everything. So the change occurs because we have a different mindset. And that mindset is given to us by Army's culture. And that is a mindset you must work on. And the reason I started with this part before answering is because when I joined the Army, I was 16, I had never spoken one complete sentence of English in my life. I didn't know speaking English. I knew Punjabi and I knew Hindi. That's all I knew. Like most of us, came from a middle class background and was good at studies. But the reason I say this is to tell you that everybody starts somewhere. No matter what your background is, no matter what your education is, no matter what your challenges have been, please remember everybody starts from somewhere. And if you have hopes to grow, you can. Okay, so that's one thing. Now to come to your counter-insurgency question, what is going on? You see, the insurgency in Kashmir really blew up around 89-90 and it became very bad during that period. Then 3-4 years later, the army raised a thing called Rashtriya Rifles, where troops came from all over the army and they were put into battalions to fight. Only one job, fight militants. I was commanding one such battalion. In the area where I was, things were very hot.
Okay.
There were a lot of militants.
If I may ask, which part of Kashmir you are posted in?
This is North Kashmir, north of Srinagar, called Kupwara.
Okay.
Kupwara is at the base of hills from where it's called the Shamshabari range. And the militants come across the Shamshabari, they cross the border, and they come down. And then first area they will reach is Kupwara. Okay, in that area. So things were pretty hot. It was risky. They would put explosives under the roads to blow up our vehicles. They would take shots at you. Gradually, we started getting hold of the situation. But around Kargil in 1999, Pakistanis stepped up violence again. And something called Fidain attack started.
Yeah.
Suicide attacks, where people started attacking army units. Fortunately, nobody ever dared attack any of my units. But I've seen a lot of those issues. So things were reasonably hot.
So what was the typical day in your life like? I mean, not you, I mean the whole battalion. What used to happen?
Look, there is no typical day in an army man's life. There really is no typical day. But if you look at a Jawan's life, which is what you should really look at, typically a Jawan would give duty at night in some post or the other on most of the days, not all days. The duty is in two parts, 2 hours now and 2 hours later. But psychologically it means you can't go to bed saying, Abhi to main sobe jagunga. You have to still get up in the middle. If you've done duty from 8 to 10, then maybe your turn will come from 2 to 4 again, or something like that. Then during day, many of the Jawans will go to guard roads. It's called road opening parties. Each Jawan is standing, say, 100 to 150 meters away from the other one. And theoretically, you can be shot at from any side.
Right.
So you have to be on the guard the whole day, and you have to watch the road, and you have to make sure nobody puts explosives. You have to make sure nobody comes and blows anything. And you have to stand there like the whole day till evening, till you come back, and you're back to doing duties at night. Other Jawans who are not doing this typically would go out on operations, ambushes, patrolling. Sometimes there is information, militants are sitting in a house or in a jungle or someplace. So then 30, 40, 50 people might go, surround the place and do an operation. And yet there are others who are helping logistically, who are cooking food, bringing rations, bringing supplies, bringing clothing, and all of that. So there's really no typical day. But let me tell you just one thing. Forget about the officers. Of course, it's the job of the officers to lead a tough life. The sacrifice and the courage shown by an ordinary Jawan in Kashmir is far greater than you see in the movies. You know, movies, of course, are false. But each individual, remember that each individual also has problems back home, from where he's completely cut off for 10 months. He has the same issues which all of us have. You know, not having enough money, parents not getting along with the wife, or vice versa, which is a typical story. Younger brother not having a job, somebody taking over the property. They're facing all those pressures and also doing their duty in Kashmir. So that's a typical day.
Okay. So while you are controlling these insurgencies happening out there, so obviously the militants would have their own source of tips, where they were also getting tips. What is the army going to do? Right. Similarly, you had your own informers. So who became a normal informer at that point of time? It was anyone or everyone could have been an army informer?
Yeah, so there is no such thing as formally a person recruited as an informer, because if you do that, that guy will poach and will be shot.
Absolutely.
But there were a lot of Kashmiris who would walk up to give information. They would give information. Some of them genuinely didn't want Pakistan to succeed or India to lose. But mostly it was because they had suffered at the hands of terrorists. Terrorists had either come to their house, eaten their food and killed somebody, or done something very stupid with their women and things like that. And those are the people who typically came up. And of course, some people would come because they thought there's going to be a financial reward. Yeah. So now the information that you get, you have to vet it very carefully, because most of the time, it doesn't really turn out to be right.
Right.
Somebody, for example, can also come to you, say something about his neighbor, because he wants his neighbor's life made miserable. So you have to vet this very carefully, which army does. And sometimes, of course, the information is spot on and, perfect. I remember once somebody came to us with information and I said, what if we go there and we find nothing? You know what he said? He said, Janab, मैं आपको एक बात यकीन दिला सकता हूँ, आप पे गोली जरूर चलेगी. उसके बाद आपने जो करना आप करना. He was so sure that this was going to happen. And and it did.
Have you been shot?
No. I have not been shot. I've been shot. You don't know which direction the bullets are coming, so I'm sure I've been in operations where bullets would have flown somewhere near me. But no, you can't make out, and I've never been shot.
Okay. During the overall career, you rose on your position. So have you been involved in any, how do I put it? Have you been any part of the troop or part of the group that has gone for training outside of India? Training or conferences probably.
Oh, more than once. I was selected in 2003 to attend a study program in the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii, in USA.
Okay.
So I spent 3 months there. I also did a strategic exercise as a brigade commander, as a brigadier. I took my brigade to US and we had an exercise with the US people. It was called Yudh Abhyas. More importantly, I was selected to go to an African country called Lesotho, which is a tiny little country in the middle of South Africa, as security advisor to the government of Lesotho. And we have a small training team there as head of the training team. Interestingly, a lot of people say, what is India doing in this country called Lesotho? In this country, there used to be a lot of coups where the army used to overturn the civilian government. So someone educated the politicians. They said, wherever there is Indian army, these coups don't happen.
Okay.
And so starting with 2001, they requested Indian army to put a little small contingent just to train their army. I was the fourth such commander.
Okay.
And there was never a coup ever since the army went.
Why was that?
We changed the culture. We taught their army a different way of doing things. If you look at Lesotho's army, if you look at their drill, their procedures, their behavior, you will say, oh, this is like Indian army. And by the way, you asked me these questions. There's a very interesting story here. When I was the security advisor, the Pakistani defense attaché from South Africa came on a visit to Lesotho. So Lesotho Army Chief said, we are getting a guest from Pakistan Army or Pakistan Defense Forces. He was an Air Force guy. I hope you're okay with it. And I said, why won't I be okay? He's a guy in uniform. But I am a security advisor. So I hope he's going to come to my office to call on me. And he said, yes, he will. So they put it in the program, and on a given day, this guy came. He was a nice guy. Came, gave me a salute. I made him sit, gave him a cup of tea and some nice snacks, and we got talking. He was a Punjabi, so we got talking even more. And then he asked me, he said, sir, आप इनको सिखाते क्या हो? तो मैंने कहा सब कुछ सिखाते हैं इनको. इनको सिखाते हैं weapon training, tactics, some strategy, logistics, how to deal with media, how to remain out of politics. वो भी सिखाते हैं इनको. You know what he said? He said, sir, 2-4 classes हमारी फौज की भी चला दिया करो. So that is how the Lesotho army did what they did.
Okay. So was this your only confrontation with any Pakistani army officer, or there have been several instances?
No, there's been no confrontation, but I have served, like I said, when I went to Hawaii for a study program, there were 3 Pakistani officers who were also doing the course. So we had a pretty good interaction, I would say. They would routinely get up and try to talk against India. And we were there. We were also 3 of us. And we decided never to reply them, never to get up and start, arguing with them in the class. So you see, it's like this. There were 80 participants in that program from 33 countries.
Okay.
Most of them were diplomats. There were very few Faujis. So first thing that amused me is that whenever you asked a question in the class and you had to get up and give your name, someone like me, I would get up and say, Colonel Neeraj Bali from India. And when the Pakistanis gave their name, they would say, Colonel so-and-so from Pakistani army. So we used to say, does your country have an army, or your army has a country? You belong to the army first. This was their sort of broad approach. One day the Pakistani brigadier did tell me, he said, Neeraj, you speak so well. When we talk against Kashmir or Gujarat or whatever, why don't you people stand up and, we will learn from each other. So I said, sir, I'll tell you why. हमारी फौज में एक सिखलाई है, और ये है कि जब बास्केटबॉल खेलो तो ड्रिबलिंग के नंबर नहीं होते, बास्केट करने के नंबर होते हैं. He said, what do you mean? Are we dribbling? मैंने कहा, that's exactly what you are doing. रोज खड़े खड़े होकर जो बोल रहे हो, इसका असर पड़ रहा है किसी के ऊपर. Why are you dribbling? हम तो 3-pointer मारने वाले हैं, कभी मौका मिलेगा तो कर देंगे. So similarly, we had a lot of fun exchanges. They would say stuff. When the course finished, there was a party for all the 80 people. Everyone was told, अपने देश का खाना लेके आओ और अपने देश की ड्रेस पहनो. तो हम जो 3-4 थे, किसी ने कुर्ता पजामा पहना, किसी ने धोती कुर्ता पहना, एक सरदार जी थे, उन्होंने अपनी पग शग अच्छी सी पहनी. मैंने पठान सूट पहन लिया. तो स्टेज पे खड़े होकर वो पाकिस्तानी अफसर ने सबके सामने मेरे से पूछा अंग्रेज़ी में कि मैं कर्नल बाली से पूछना चाहता हूँ, ये पठान सूट में क्यों है? इंडिया का कौन सा हिस्सा है जहाँ पठान सूट पहनते हैं लोग? मैंने माइक लिया, मैंने बोला कश्मीर में. वो है इंडिया का हिस्सा जहाँ हम पठान सूट पहनते हैं. So we had a lot of fun, I think. We had a lot of fun dealing with them, and yeah, it was a pretty good experience.
So these diplomatic conferences that happen, what is the purpose, basic purpose of these conferences?
So it's not a conference, it's a study program.
Okay.
Where you're supposed to learn about strategy, about bigger issues of security. It's not a military course.
Okay.
So it's a little higher than that. So the idea is to educate your officers so that they're able to deal with complex problems in the world in a better way.
So if we start talking about the stories that any army person has, like you, who has served the army for 40 years, the stories won't stop and the podcast will keep on rolling. So the basic idea of today's podcast, because I want this podcast to be a learning curve personally for me and for the viewers. For someone who has been in the army for 40 years, we want to learn from you what is the culture of the army that we can implement in our own lives, because you have served in the most hostile of environments. So there are uncertainties, right? And uncertainties to the extent where your life is at stake. And it's not only your life, it's the battalion's reputation, it's the country's reputation, several other factors. What would be your message for us?
Look, you're right. I can tell you stories all day. I will probably say two things. There is a story I'm very fond of telling, and I'll say this today also. And there's another story which I don't think I've told in a podcast earlier, and I'd like to share that. The first lesson I want to pass on is this. No matter what job you're doing, no matter whether you are just a father or a mother or a school basketball captain or a manager or a vice president or whatever you are, if you want people to follow you, if you want to be a leader, not just a manager, managers manage things, leaders lead people. If you want to be a leader and you want people to genuinely follow you, like people follow their officers in the army, there is only one lesson you got to remember and execute, and that is you can only lead by example. अगर आप अपने उदाहरण सेट नहीं कर सकते या करना नहीं चाहते तो आप लीडरशिप को भूल जाइए. The world doesn't want to listen to your lectures. Okay? If lectures could win, then every company MD and CEO can give a lecture. Everybody can stand on the stage and say wonderful things. It is what you do that matters. Even as a parent, a child follows what the parent does, not what the parent says all the time.
Yeah.
So अगर आपके अपने बच्चे ही मानने को तैयार नहीं ऐसे, तो कंपनी में क्या आपको बनाएगा? So what does it mean for you? It means be more competent than others, work harder than the people you lead, take more risks, protect people.
Yeah.
Okay? The biggest motivator for people is, do they feel safe under you when they come for the job? Do they feel कुछ गड़बड़ होगी तो ये हमें बचाएगा, और do they feel गड़बड़ होगी ये हमें बस के नीचे फेंक देगा? He will say, तुम जाके MD को मिल लो, मैं तो घर जा रहा हूँ. Okay? So how is it? So that is what it is. How deep is this understanding in the army? I will tell you with this story. 1997, 4th of June, we were going on a kacha track in J&K. Militants had put a lot of explosive under the track. They put it months ago, and there's a pipe, and then there's a wire which comes out. They attach it to a device and an antenna, and they blow it. My vehicle had gone ahead. The next vehicle got blown. There was so much explosive that gadda was 8 foot deep. and the vehicle went up above eucalyptus trees, took 2 turns in the air, crashed against the ground. It instantly killed a major of my unit, Major Mohit Vig, यहीं चंडीगढ़ के हैं वो, और 2 jawans also died. One young officer, Ravi Loganathan, he was a lieutenant, and 2 jawans were trapped inside that steel. And militants started firing on that vehicle to kill everybody. When we heard the dhamaka, we turned around. Then somebody said, गाड़ी में मत जाओ और explosive होगा, कहीं और भी लगाया होगा. So we were carrying our AK-47s and we were running towards the firing. As we were running, now if you've seen army officers, senior army officers wearing dress, the uniform, they wear a red colored thing on the collars. Police में नीले रंग का होता है, फौज में. It is worn by colonels and above, but it is not supposed to be worn during operations. Because if you wear it, तो दुश्मन को पता चल जाएगा कि कमांडर कौन है सबसे पहले. मेरे को सीओ बने 10 ही दिन हुए थे, तो मैं नए दूल्हे की तरह मैंने अभी भी वो कपड़े उतारे नहीं थे. I was still wearing it. So an officer next to me said, "Sir, take it off. You're not supposed to wear this and somebody will now fire at you." And I said, "Yeah, I will take it off." But your mind is full of many problems at that time. You're thinking, अगला क्या step लेना है मैंने. तो मैंने एकदम नहीं उतारा उसको. तो हम जब और 100-200 मीटर आगे भागे, तो मेरे लेफ्ट साइड पे एक फौज का बार्बर था. Okay? He was also in uniform, carrying AK-47. His name was Rooplal. Rooplal stopped me and he said this. He said, "Sir, मैं एक बात कहूँ." मैंने कहा, बोलो. कहता, जो बात मेजर साहब ने कही बड़े पते की बात है. ये जो आप घूमते हो ना ये लगा के, ये तो लागू भी नहीं है. इसमें कोई बहादुरी थोड़ा है. अभी आपको कोई मार देगा, फिर भगदड़ मच जाएगी. तो आई सेड, हाँ रूपलाल, मैं इसको उतारने लगा हूँ. ही सेड, सर ये मेरी सलाह नहीं है, आपको पहनना नहीं चाहिए था, पर सर ऐसा है, इसको ना आज जान भी चली जाए, आज नहीं उतारना. इनफैक्ट 3 महीने मत उतारना सर, कुछ भी रिस्क हो जाए. क्योंकि जवान आपको देखते हैं, आप लीडर हो. किसी को ये गलत फहमी नहीं होनी चाहिए कि 2-3 लोग शहीद होते हैं और हमारा सीओ घबरा जाता है, चाहे आपकी अपनी जान चली जाए. Can you think of a more powerful advice?
Wow.
This is what even the last person in the army understands, that you have to set an example. So I said, okay. So रूपलाल की शान में मैंने वो 3.5 साल नहीं उतारा. मैं हमेशा पहन के रखे. लोग बोलते थे क्यों पहन के घूम रहा है. मैंने कहा मेरे बार्बर की सलाह है, क्या बताऊं. So this is one. And the second thing, which we can come to later if we have time, is whatever you do, please remember you are responsible for yourself and your job. Okay? Everything doesn't come by orders, and everything doesn't happen because मेरे जेडी में लिखा है मैं कर दूंगा, नहीं तो करूंगा नहीं.
मुझे बोला नहीं गया,
मेरे को बोला नहीं गया, किसी ने बोला ही नहीं. ठीक है. और कई बार तो जब बोलने की बारी आती है तो हम गायब भी हो जाते हैं, वो भी सबको पता है. तो उसकी भी एक मेरे पास बहुत अच्छी कहानी है. बट लेट्स सी इफ यू हैव द टाइम, आई विल कम बैक.
So, sir, again, talking about culture, I would like to, emphasize more on this today. You have also written a book, Winning Culture. What prompted you to write that book?
Yeah, so the winning culture, the whole title is The Winning Culture, Lessons from the Indian Army to Transform Your Business. I think in 2016 or 17, I had gone to IIM Ahmedabad. And at the end of my talk, some student asked me, he said, आप लोग तो हमारे जैसे ही हो, हमारे जैसे घरों से आते हो, वही बैकग्राउंड है, सब कुछ है, तो why are you so different? You are willing to die when there is no bonus. कुछ भी नहीं है. You don't get extra money for dying. So, what is the real reason? मैंने ये सवाल बहुत से ऑडियंस से पूछा है वापस, और मुझे हमेशा जो जवाब मिलता है, it is wonderful, but it is wrong. People say, it is because you are more patriotic. It is because you are more dedicated. Let me clarify. People in the army are not more or less patriotic than people like you or people like them or rest of the countrymen. Anybody who loves his country, who's a good citizen, is as patriotic as everybody in the army. Okay? So ये तो कहानी गलत है. मैंने फौज में अपने पूरे 4 डेकेड्स में कभी पेट्रियोटिज्म वर्ड नहीं सुना था. कभी मैंने किसी डिस्कशन में सुना नहीं कि हम पेट्रियोटिज्म हैं और हम ये कर देंगे. People just do their job. The real reason is because army has a culture and everybody follows that culture. Let me explain. Every family, every organization, every company, every political party has a culture. What is culture? Culture is what we collectively do. In a government office, why you might find things sluggish is because that's the culture. Everybody started doing that. Why everybody does that? Because they realize that इससे हमारा काम चल जाएगा. It won't happen in one of the new banks, a private bank, because उनका काम नहीं चलेगा.
Right.
All right. So rewards, punishments, examples, tradition, norms set the culture. Indian Army is blessed. We probably had a great culture at independence, and then we Indianized it and made it even better. So ordinary people do things automatically because there is a culture which doesn't let them do things differently. In a battlefield, we will not let anybody die injured, and we will not leave him there, no matter what the risk. Everybody knows the story of Vikram Batra. How did he die? He died trying to rescue a Jawan who was already dead. Okay, he was trying to get his body out. So this is what it is. That it's a culture. Therefore, if you are a leader in a company, or head of a department, or head of a vertical, even head of a small little team, please focus on the culture of that team. Culture always flows from the top.
Absolutely.
It doesn't go from bottom to top.
Absolutely.
Okay. So set the right examples, set the right rewards, set the right punishments, set the right SOPs. Ensure everybody follows it. Culture is not what you put on your walls on a fancy poster. उसका कोई मतलब नहीं होता. My values are this, this thing is that. Culture is what you really do. Okay. So Army has this great culture. We were blessed. Culture is a river. We were just taken in that river and taken in a certain direction.
You get invited to a lot of corporate events as well to talk about cultures and all these things. What's your top 3 messages to the CEO of the company or the leadership of the company?
Right. My first message is that culture matters. You see, even that point is not understood. I have never met an MD or a CEO who doesn't know what culture is. Okay, they all talk about it. Sir, हमारा culture ठीक नहीं है. हमारी company में gossip बहुत है. Proactiveness नहीं है. Everybody knows these problems. But what to do about it, they don't know. Or they don't do. The reason why they don't do it is because it is not understood that culture is not some fuzzy idea. It affects your bottom line, it affects your top line. Corporate sector is focused on numbers, which is good. But you don't realize that your culture is driving your numbers. So once you realize that this culture is going to affect my profitability, even my cash flow. If your culture is of managers who don't worry about getting payments back from the clients, your cash flow will suffer. Right? So culture is important. That is the first lesson I tell them. Second thing I tell them, which I just said, is culture doesn't go against gravity. There is no reverse osmosis that culture will rise from bottom to don't expect the chowkidar to change the culture of the company or the manager to change. Culture always will come from top. So the good news is that if you're a leader, if you're a CEO, if you're a VP, if you're a general manager, even if you're a manager, senior executive, you can get hold of the culture below you, not above you, below you. And you can try to change it, transform it. So culture, so leaders should not sit and moan and say, हमारा culture ठीक नहीं है. अरे भैया, that is your responsibility. You are supposed to do it, right? So that's the second thing. Third and the last thing I would say is, please set an example. Set a personal example. Make sure all SOPs and procedures are such that the culture is strengthened, right? It shouldn't happen that you're saying something else, but your SOP says something else. Let's say you say everyone should be punctual, but people are coming late and you're doing nothing about it because you feel भाग जाएंगे. Then your culture will be late coming. Okay? So you have to focus on the right things. You can't change 50 things, but change 2, 3, 4 things. You look around, why is Indigo known for being in time? No, I'm not selling Indigo, by the way. I'm not selling any airlines. There's a reason. Go to the airport and see what they're doing. How they're pushing you towards the bus. How they're pushing you into the aircraft. How they're making you wait outside the aircraft even when it is being cleaned. Because they don't want to be late. You sit in a flight, time or no time, you will hear boarding complete, which means we are going. Okay? And so I used to always wonder, what is such a rocket science that others can't pick up this? It's culture. You can paint your aircraft, you can have new uniforms, you can have a new slogan, but unless you fix your culture, it's not going to change.
Just to end the topic of culture, just a couple of things. You have to tell a story around that, which we had to stop in between. So first that, once you have, I have one last question on culture.
Okay, so this is back in the early 90s. We were in Assam, in a district called Mangaldoy. And I was a major, I was in the headquarters. We were living in Mangaldoy in tents. And there was a battalion of Rajputs which used to be in a place called Tangla. Now, Tangla was probably 15, 20 kilometers away. There was a single, narrow road running from Tangla to Mangaldoy. Two Faujis on a motorcycle used to come to deliver official dak mail every day, and they used to pick up mail and take it back. Now, one guy used to drive and the other guy used to sit at the back, and the guy at the back had a weapon, and the guy in the front also had a weapon, probably slung. The militants saw them coming every day, and they decided that they could come from behind on a motorcycle and kill them. So on a given day, they came from behind and they fired automatic, with some automatic weapon. Both the boys got hit, soldiers got hit. The motorcycle crashed, they fell on the ground. They tried firing back, but the militants got away. I came to know, I still remember, in the morning at about 10:30, 11, I was standing outside the tent. I saw a truck coming and a lot of civilians there yelling towards me, and I went and saw one of the soldiers was there. He was, he had multiple bullet wounds. He had bled. And so we immediately called the doctor and we patched him up a little bit and we put him in a vehicle and we sent him off to the military hospital. As I was walking back to make the report, I remembered that there were two of them. What happened to the second guy? Has he died? What happened to him? So the first boy, I think his name was Ashok, and the second boy was a guy called Last Naik Tiwari. Before I could think what had happened, a jeep came, and a village jeep, crammed with civilians, and in the middle was this second boy, also, wounded and sitting. So we took him out, we brought him into a tent, we put him on the ground, we started giving him first aid, and I sat on the floor asking him details about what had happened. I still remember one Jawan brought water, and this boy who was lying down, bleeding, or he had bled, he looked at the Jawan and said, "तू रहने देना पानी, कोई मरने वाला थोड़ा हूँ, गोली लगी है, पहले बात करने दे." So anyway, we patched him up and we sent him off to the hospital. There were two questions in my mind. One is, why didn't they come together? And the second was, you see, we went to the site and we found the fired cases, cartridges. When any weapon is fired, you have a cartridge comes out. We found cartridges there which were all clearly militant weapons.
Okay.
But there was not a single Indian Army cartridge. So I said, these guys said we fired. Maybe they didn't fire. Maybe they were, under too much trauma. So I went to the hospital one day and they both survived. So I asked the senior guy, Tiwari, I said, तुम कट्ठे क्यों नहीं आए? कहता सर वो पहले गोली लग गई तो दिमागी पागल सा हो जाता है उस टाइम पे, तो थोड़ी सी होश ठीक हुई तो मैंने देखा ए ट्रक आ रहा था, तो मैंने कहा दोनों में से सीनियर तो मैं हूँ, कमांडर मैं हूँ, मुझे तो पहले रिपोर्ट देनी चाहिए, तो मैंने इस लड़के को चढ़ा दिया. He was not sure that this vehicle will go exactly where we were. Look at the sense of responsibility. You have been shot. You might die. But your responsibility says, I am senior, so I am responsible. I have to first give the report so that the militants can be caught. Okay? I said, अच्छा. And what happened to, मैंने कहा तुमने बोला तुमने फायर किया, तो वहाँ वो तो मिले नहीं fired cases. What happens is that when we are in a peace station, say like Chandigarh, when Jawans go to fire or officers go to fire, we have to collect all fired cases and give them back. It is an audit requirement. Okay, so if you fire 100 rounds, You have to account for 100 rounds. You can't, otherwise ammunition will be lost and nobody will know.
Uh-huh.
And if you don't do it, there may be a court of inquiry and the battalion might get a bad name. In operations, there is no such rule. You don't collect fired cases in Kashmir, or you can fire 10,000 rounds if you want. This boy was not clear about the rule.
Okay.
So he crawled around after being injured to collect all fired cases so that the battalion doesn't get a bad name.
Wow.
He said, मेरे कोट की जेब में है, आप देख लो कोट पार्का की जेब में सारे हैं. Here it's people who do this. Ordinary people. These are not Paramveer Chakra people. Ordinary people. What is wrong with us in corporate, and I am a corporate man myself, that we crib and we curse about every little thing. मेरे को शनिवार को बुला लिया, पता नहीं क्या करते हैं, मेरे को संडे को काम करना पड़ गया, मुझे रात शाम देर हो गई. We crib and curse. That is why I said the lesson is, if you have a role, then you have a responsibility. Okay? If leaders have to tell you all the time what you should do, well, then you're just a follower. You're not likely to be a leader then. Okay? So, this is the sense of duty. And by the way, this story which I've told you is not a completely unusual story. It's a great story, but things like that happen all the time in the army, where people do this. So, that's the one I wanted to talk about that time.
So, like you mentioned that these boys were hit, and yet, he had the audacity or the courage to pick up the shells and send his, the junior person first. So, not day in, day out, that army officers or any Jawan or anyone in the army or any of the defense forces, how do you guys face the fear and come out of it so strong?
There is no one in the world who's not scared.
Absolutely.
No army, navy, air force, para commando, Marcos, you can call it anything you like. Everybody has fear. The lesson from the army is, again, best told with a little story. Sam Maneckshaw, the greatest of the great soldiers we had, when he was a major, he was posted in the jungles of Burma, Myanmar, and he was commanding Sikh troops. In his company, there was a Sikh boy, Sohan Singh, who was 6 feet something, but Maneckshaw had recommended that he should not be promoted because he was not good. One day, Manekshaw's Subedar Sahab came to him and said, कि सर बड़ी गड़बड़ हो गई, सोहन सिंह सबको बोल रहा है कि आज रात को आपको वो पिस्टल लेके आएगा, आपको मार देगा. So Sam said, बुलाओ उसको. तो he said, भाई सोहन सिंह सुना तो मुझे मारने की प्लान बना रहा है, here is my loaded pistol, ये ले. तो सोहन सिंह से नहीं जनाब सर मैं आपका बच्चा हूँ, मैं कैसे, वो तो मैं मखौल कर रहा था, मजाक कर रहा था, no such thing. So Sam gave him one dhap on the back and said, go. When Sam came after dinner, the Subedar was back. He said, sir, आपने बहुत गलती कर दी, because Sohan Singh is telling everyone, मैंने तो मेजर साहब को बुद्धू बना दिया, मारना तो है ही आज. He said, ठीक है, उसको फिर बुलाओ. उसका देख सोहन, ये ले मेरा हथियार, मेरे तंबू की रखवाली आज रात को तू करेगा. सुबह मुझे 5:30 बजे एक मग गर्म पानी का शेव करने के लिए और 6 बजे एक चाय, ठीक है. एंड Maneckshaw went. कुछ नहीं हुआ. People used to ask Sam, were you not scared? He said, I was so scared, I didn't sleep the whole night. थोड़ा सा खड़का होता था, मैंने कहा आ गया ये, सोन आ गया, मैं तो सोया ही नहीं. He said, it is all right to be scared, but you must not show fear. That is a lesson. Whatever happens in your life, it is all right to be scared, but do not show fear. Now, why? When you don't show fear, your brain starts sending that signal to your body and you start feeling brave. Secondly, people around you become calm.
Yes.
Think of a manager. There's a crisis, somebody says, oh, CEO साहब बहुत नाराज हैं, और उसके हाथ पैर फूल जाते हैं. He starts yelling at everyone. कहता है यार तुम लोग काम नहीं करते, मुसीबत डाल दी तुमने, मैं जा रहा हूँ, उनको बता देना मेरे घर में कोई बीमार है, मैं घर जा रहा हूँ. Compared to someone who says, कोई बात नहीं, don't worry, मैं हूँ ना, okay. So you've got to, for the sake of the people you lead and command, don't show fear. As they say, if you come across a wild animal in the jungle, don't show fear. Everybody can smell fear.
Yes.
And then they catch you, right? So that's the lesson. It's all right to be anxious. It's all right to be worried. It's natural. Life is difficult. It is supposed to be difficult. But try not to display fear. Okay? And things finally turn out all right. We all know you only die once. There's no point dying every day, 10 times in a day, isn't it? So,
Sorry, I said that I have just two questions, but this is my last question again on culture, because we are talking so much about culture.
okay.
I am also from a corporate background, as you are, and there are millions others, right? So normally in India we say ये तो लाला कंपनी है, ये MNC है, MNC के कल्चर में the culture of an MNC and culture of an Indian lala company is so different. So what is the difference when it comes to Indian companies and Western companies?
I don't think I can say in a very sweeping way. I can definitely tell you what goes on in the family-owned business versus MNC, where in a family-owned business, there's a central control and there is less desire to give that control to delegate. The biggest issue with a family-owned business, in my view, is it grows from a small shop to a big business or a mid-sized business, becomes successful and wants to become modern, but nobody wants to let go of controls. Nobody wants to delegate. Okay?
Yeah.
You still continue to follow the same processes, the same ad hoc ways, and that destroys any chance of super growth. Now coming to West. Look, we Indians have a lot of great advantages, even vis-a-vis West. That entrepreneur spirit, that jugaad, that we will get it done no matter what, that exists in India is amazing. So to that extent, and that's why we are thriving at that startup level. India's, thousands of startups every year are coming up. Second, we have a certain degree of native intelligence. And I think our education system in the schools is not all that bad. There is certain native intelligence which makes us so successful even when we go abroad. Right? Third, we have a culture of greater tolerance, and I hope it remains that way, which has made us successful all over the world again, because people like us as compared to many other countries, which I don't want to mention. But what we need to improve is firstly work ethic. We need to learn from the Japanese. We need to learn from the West that work is not only to be done, it has to be done with great pride, and it has to be done with great finesse. I went with a couple of friends for a dinner in Tokyo, and I wanted to pay the bill because they had been very nice to me earlier. And I said, how much tip should I give? And they said, there's no tip here. People don't take tips because they say, "Ye to hamara kaam hai." They take pride in their work. So no extra money. They will not take it.
Okay.
That's the work ethic. I saw a very well-to-do family walk into a Japanese restaurant, and the table was very neat. There was just a little spot. Nobody complained. The woman went, picked up some, cleaning material and cleaned the whole table, and then went in through it and just sat there pleasantly. So there is a certain work ethic that we must do the things well. It's not just completing the job, but doing it very well. I think we need to learn that. We need to be more punctual. We need to mean what we say. We have this great middle class habit of saying something in too many words but not meaning much. We need to be direct, say the right thing, and be excellent. And we have everything going for us as a country.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. So thank you so much for talking about on culture. But we cannot have a very senior army officer come on the show and not talk about, the overall what's going on between India, China, and Pakistan, our two hostile neighbors. What's exactly going on? Where are we in terms of relation with Pakistan and China?
Okay, so as you probably know, I'm the director of a think tank called Gyan Chakra. It's an army-sponsored think tank, but whatever I'm about to say is obviously my views. There's nothing official about these views.
Absolutely.
Look, in my limited understanding, Pakistan has at best or worst nuisance value. We focus too much on Pakistan. Pakistan today, their economy is in a terrible state. You just have to Google how much milk costs in Pakistan today, what is the cost of the rupee, etc. You know, they're in a terrible state. Terrorism, which they had bred, is biting them back. Politically, they are in such an awful state, they have to keep Imran Khan in jail to make sure he doesn't come back to power. And that won't last forever. A lot of parts of that country are not in the control of the government. We don't know who the hell is sending these militants who come across, So, and they have religiously, on the religion side, they have become so radicalized, which will probably stop their modernization. So, our relationship with Pakistan, as this present government has decided, that they will not be considered a stakeholder in Kashmir problem. We are not talking to them, which is right. The only unfinished business with Pakistan is that they have to return PoK.
Yeah.
Foolishly, we had given impression, I think, for some time, that we want to convert the line of control into the border. No. When you negotiate with somebody, your final position cannot become your first opening offer, isn't it? In this case, there is no offer. So the only unfinished business is PoK and the end of militancy. There is no other business. And therefore, I think what the government has done is reduced the Pakistanis to a point of irrelevance in the dialogue over Kashmir, which is the right thing to do. We are a strong army, we are a strong country. I don't think we should always be alert, but I don't think we need to be worried about Pakistan. So that is not an issue I would say we should focus too much on. Pakistan, if it survives on its own, that'll also be an achievement. What's going on in Balochistan today, what's going on in the other parts, in Pakhtunkhwa area, what's going on in the trouble with Afghans today is indicative of the fact that the country is not in a great shape. And I don't think we should be just alert and vigilant. With China, it's a different story. The border with China, which is called line of actual control, the Chinese believe that it was never ratified between India and China. The British had given us the McMahon line as the border, and we felt that this is the border. But the Chinese have said that we have never signed on it, and therefore they don't accept it. Unfortunately, ever since the 62 war, the Chinese attitude has been not to settle the border issue and to keep it somehow, boiling. And every now and then there is a little incursion and then they go back. And by the way, what happened in Galwan was not the first time. It happened in 67 around Nathullah. There was an ambush. There were other issues in between. In 84, they came to a place called Somdorong Chu and Wangdung and occupied some place, etc. So this has been going on. Galwan was the time when actual clash took place. And probably the clash took place because we as a country are a more confident country now. We don't take this kind of nonsense lying down. Now there has been a disengagement agreement where both parties have agreed that wherever we used to patrol before Galwan, we can again start patrolling up to that point. So the Chinese will patrol up to the point which may be considered by us as in our territory, but Chinese think that's China, and we will patrol it similarly on their side. So more stability and peace and tranquility will occur on the border. But that is zero reason to lower our guard.
Yeah.
There are steps beyond disengagement called de-escalation and de-induction. We are nowhere near that. In fact, I've just written an article in the Chanakya forum where I've said that if we look at disengagement as a light on the other end of the tunnel, we must know that could be a train coming towards us. Right? So don't get blindsided. Here is one country with whom we need to be vigilant. And I think we are on the right lines in terms of developing our economy. That is where our strength must lie. Alongside, we must continue to increase our military readiness. And the wonderful job that the foreign policy has done, the diplomatic heft we have today in the world, That also must continue.
Yeah.
But just today I was reading in the newspaper somewhere that there's a article that China wants normal ties. I think it was on Twitter. China wants normal ties with India. That'll be nice. All right. But I don't think I'm going to lose any sleep over it. It may not happen in a hurry. In the meanwhile, our trade with China has only increased in the last few years. We need China. China needs us in some ways. So that must continue. So I think maintaining peace, continuing to talk about the border, trying to make sure that it is finally resolved, right? Developing more trade and diplomatic relationship is the way to go. But caution is the central word I would like to talk about.
Do you believe that China can probably cross US to become the most powerful nation in the country in the world?
Look, these are all matters of speculation. It all depends on how the US gets its act together. China certainly is on the way to becoming, one of the biggest economies and becoming a leading country in many ways. So, but whether that trajectory will finally take them there, when will it take them there? The Chinese economy had begun to falter in the last year or so. So it's not like they have been growing at the same rate throughout. In the world, it is not America that has declined. One of the people I really respect, Fareed Zakaria, he's a US citizen but born in India. He's written a book called The Post-American World. He says it's not the America which has declined, it's others who are growing. So you're right, it's China who's growing. We are growing.
Absolutely.
Maybe some other countries are growing. But whether they will overtake US, they might. Probably not in my lifetime.
Okay. So, hypothetically asking, if you have to rank the powerful countries in the world right now, 1, 2, 3. Let's take it to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
US surely is still the most powerful country, the biggest economy, technologically the strongest, the biggest military, far bigger than many countries put together. I would rate China as number 2. And without thumping our own chest, I would rate us as 3. Because I don't see, we have overtaken Britain for sure. There are other countries which are rich and strong and powerful like Germany, or Japan with economies of that nature. But they're too small. If you just look at what our performance has been, how the trajectory has been in the past few years, and what our potential is, because of this, the population we have, the education levels that are beginning to show up. We always talk badly of our education, but the fact is we have a very large English-speaking population which can deal with the rest of the world. So I think I would definitely like to put India as 3. I may be faltering somewhere. I'm a little partial to Germany, so let me put Germany at 4, and I love Japan. Let me put them at 5.
Thank you so much, sir. But before I let you go, I have just one question, because you mentioned Sam Maneckshaw. So have you ever had the chance to meet the legend?
Absolutely. So I've had the great honor of meeting Sam Maneckshaw. He used to come to Defence Services Staff College to deliver a talk. The talk was meant to be for about an hour, but if I remember correctly, in our case, it was 2.5 hours. He was wearing a uniform of Field Marshal, and he stood on the stage. There were no notes. He talked about strategy before the 1971 war and how Mrs. Gandhi told him to go to a war and he refused. And then finally he agreed, and his equation with Babu Jagjeevan Ram. And it used to be full of stories, anecdotes, some of them really nice, some of them very funny, most of it inspiring. So that was that. And then one day there was a party, an Air Force party, and 2 Army students used to be attached with the Air Force because of their performance, and I was one of them. And we were there, and Sam came, and my wife said, can we meet him? And I said, sure. So we walked up to him, and I introduced myself, and I said, this is my wife. And he was extremely charming. I mean, he was really wonderful. He came, he put an arm around her waist and said, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Chandigarh. He said, some of the loveliest women I meet are from Chandigarh. He said, I went to a college in Chandigarh. He'd come to, I think, MCM college. I came to Chandigarh to a college. Every girl who came up to take a prize was lovelier than the previous girl. And then I went out for tea and I met their mothers. And they were like, Maja. They had put on weight. He said, so don't become like them. He just cracked a joke. And so Sam, you just stood next to him and you learned a few new lessons every time. So I had the pleasure, yes, very briefly, but I had the pleasure.
Just a bit more about him. What was that man like? I mean, I have heard so many stories, so many, army people talking about him, that his vibe, his aura was something just else. I mean, anyone who came in contact with him would, take something away from him.
He was amazing, See, there is a human spirit where you either, when you think and when you talk and when you imagine, you take counsel of fears, and some of us take counsel of our hopes and optimism and happy things. He was in that category, right? Whatever he said came from a place of happiness and optimism, and that reflected on everybody else who stood around him. When he was a youngster, he was shot up in the war in multiple places and he would have died. But his Sahayak picked him up and they somehow managed to evacuate him, and they brought him to a hospital where I think there was an Australian doctor, if I'm not mistaken, who had a look at him, and he had several bullet injuries and everyone thought he's going to go. And when Sam opened his eyes a little and the doctor asked him, what happened to you? And Sam said, the mule kicked me. And the Australian doctor laughed and said, oh, you have a sense of humor even now? Maybe you are worthy of saving, and he saved his life. So that is the way Sam was. It was a great aura. He was a great leader. I mean, you could just listen to him talk about leadership and you could learn things instinctively.
Sir, we have learned so much from you today and cannot thank you enough for that. So as when I started the podcast, I said that it will be a learning curve for me and for the viewers. I have learnt a lot and I hope so have the viewers. So thank you so much for being on the show. And again, filling that gap that we haven't had a defense legend on our show for quite a while now. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. I'm definitely not a legend, but thank you. It's a great honor.
I believe I will just counter to the thing that you said that you are not a legend. So for me, any army officer or for matter of fact, any defense officer who is protecting our nation is a legend for us.
Well, that's very gracious of you, and thank you very much. And I hope I really enjoyed talking to you, and I wish your podcast all the very best.
Thank you so much, sir.
I'm very certain. I heard your views when I was coming down with you, and I'm very sure your podcast will go places. So all the very best. Do well, and thank you. And
thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.